An arrogant billionaire leaves only a $1 tip, and the waitress's reaction turns his world upside down. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of conversation filled the air of Sunshine's diner when the door swung open, letting in a gust of Manhattan's chilly wind and a figure who looked like he'd just stepped out of a Forbes cover. Alexander Sterling, wearing a bespoke $12,000 Brioni suit and Italian shoes worth more than any employee's monthly salary, crossed the diner as if merely gracing the place with his presence was a favor. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and homemade pies hung in the air, but Sterling wrinkled his nose as though detecting a foul smell. His ice-blue eyes swept across the worn Formica tables and patched vinyl seats with barely disguised contempt. He had just closed a $2.3 billion deal, absorbing a promising startup into his expanding tech empire. The choice of that particular diner hadn't been his. His driver had fallen ill, and he refused to wait for the replacement. "Table for one," he announced in a loud voice, ignoring the sign clearly instructing customers to wait to be seated. Claire Matthews adjusted the mustard-yellow apron bearing the diner's faded logo and took a deep breath before walking over. 15 years of waiting tables had taught her how to read people, and this man radiated trouble like a nuclear reactor leaking radiation. "Good afternoon, sir. Please follow me," she said with a professional smile, leading him to a clean table by the window. Sterling pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the seat before sitting down, a gesture not lost on the other patrons. "Menu," he demanded, without so much as a glance at Claire. "Here you go, sir," she replied, handing him the laminated menu. "Our special today is—" "I'm not interested in the special," Sterling cut her off, waving his hand as if swatting away a pesky fly. "Bring me water, Perrier, if you have anything that's sophisticated." Claire kept smiling, though the sparkle in her eyes dimmed slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. We have sparkling or still mineral water." Sterling sighed dramatically. "Still, then. And make sure the glass is properly clean." Nearby, an elderly couple exchanged disapproving looks. At the counter, a man in construction gear shook his head in disbelief. Claire returned with the water and a spotless glass. Sterling held it up to the light before allowing her to pour. "I'll have the prime steak with truffle mushrooms," he declared, closing the menu with unnecessary force. "Sir, I'm sorry to inform you, but we don't serve—" "It's on the menu," Sterling insisted, pointing to the most expensive item listed, a prime burger with sautéed mushrooms. "Ah, right, the prime burger. An excellent choice," Claire gently corrected him. "How would you like it cooked?" "Medium. And I hope your cooks know the difference between medium and rare, unlike the last place I had the misfortune of dining." As Claire walked away with the order, Sterling pulled out his top-of-the-line phone and started making loud calls, discussing eight-figure sums as though he were alone. A young mother at the next table tried to soothe her baby, who began to cry at his raised tone. "Excuse me," Claire intervened politely. "Sir, we do have a more private area if you need to make calls." Sterling covered the phone's microphone. "I'm perfectly fine here. If the noise bothers you so much, perhaps some of your customers should consider establishments more suited to their profile." The baby kept crying, and the embarrassed mother began gathering her things. Claire quickly approached her. "Please stay. I'll bring a fresh bottle for the little one, on the house." When the burger arrived, Sterling found every reason to complain. The meat was simultaneously overcooked and undercooked. The mushrooms were both dried out and somehow soggy. The bun was too toasted, yet not crispy enough. "This is unacceptable," he declared, after eating 3/4 of the burger. "I demand to speak to the manager." "I'm the shift manager, sir," Claire replied calmly. "How can I help you?" Sterling let out a derisive laugh. "Of course you are. Well, that explains this establishment's level." He shoved the plate away. "Bring me the check, and I hope it reflects the deplorable quality of the service." Claire brought the bill, $24.50. Sterling pulled out a crocodile leather wallet and tossed $25.50 onto the table, making a point of highlighting the extra dollar. "That should cover your effort," he said with a cruel smile. Claire looked at the bill and the lone dollar tip, less than 5% of the total. In that moment, something changed in her expression. The professional smile gave way to genuine compassion that threw Sterling off balance. Mr. Sterling, she said softly, and the fact that she knew his name, though he hadn't mentioned it, took him by surprise. I hope one day you realize that true wealth isn't in the bank, but in the hearts we touch. A deafening silence followed. The other customers, who had long stopped pretending not to notice the scene, watched with a mix of admiration for Claire and contempt for Sterling. The construction worker at the counter gave a discreet applause. Sterling felt his face grow hot. He opened his mouth to reply, but for the first time in years, maybe decades, no biting words came out. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and left the diner without looking back. The limousine, with the substitute driver, was already waiting. As it navigated the streets of Manhattan, Claire's words kept echoing in his mind. There was something in the way she had looked at him, not with anger or resentment, but with a kind of empathetic sadness, as though she could see right through his layers of arrogance to something broken inside him. "Home," he ordered the driver, his voice less steady than he'd have liked. In the rearview mirror, his reflection stared back at him. A man in his early 50s, perfectly trimmed grey hair, face etched with lines of worry and ambition, a man who had just closed a multi-billion-dollar deal and should have felt on top of the world. So why were a waitress's simple words affecting him so deeply? Outside the diner, the first drops of a gentle rain began to fall on the city that never sleeps, washing away the dust from the streets and, perhaps, starting to wash away some of the indifference Alexander Sterling had built up over the years. Claire put the dollar in her apron pocket and went back to work, knowing her words had planted a seed that might, with luck, grow in that seemingly barren heart of his. Sterling turned over in bed for the 100th time that night. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:47 a.m., its red numbers seeming to mock his insomnia. The $2,000 Egyptian silk comforter that usually lulled him to sleep now felt rough against his restless skin. True wealth isn't in the bank, but in the hearts we touch. Claire's words echoed in his mind like a persistent bell. He sat up in his king-size bed, running his hands over his tired face. Why had that insignificant waitress managed to pierce his armor so easily? Why did her simple words bother him so much? The penthouse apartment, with its panoramic view of Central Park, suddenly felt claustrophobic. Sterling got up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Below, even at this hour, New York pulsed with life. Yellow cabs weaved through the streets like metallic fireflies, each carrying stories he would never know. A flash of memory struck him without warning. Himself at age 8, sitting at the small kitchen table of his childhood home, while his mother served dinner, wearing a worn-out apron not so different from Claire's. "Alexander," his mother would say, in that Irish accent she never fully lost. "Remember that money can buy comfort, but it can't buy character." At the time, he had promised himself he would never forget those words. What kind of man had he become? When, exactly? Had he started measuring people by the size of their bank accounts? The rising sun found him still awake, contemplating those uncomfortable questions. His reflection in the bathroom mirror told the story of his sleepless night, red eyes, dark circles that even his expensive skincare routine couldn't hide. "Cancel my morning appointments," he ordered his assistant via the intercom. "I'll be in the office after lunch." "But sir, the board meeting—" "I said after lunch," Sterling cut in, more harshly than intended. He paused, remembering Claire's gaze. "Please," he added, surprising himself and likely his assistant too, who was silent for a few seconds before murmuring, "Yes, sir." By the time he arrived at the office, something felt different. It wasn't the surroundings, the same marble walls, the same Italian carpet, the same absurdly expensive artwork. It was his own perception that had changed. For the first time in years, he truly looked at the people around him. The receptionist quickly averted her eyes as he passed, her professional smile slipping for a fraction of a second. The young mailroom clerk practically dove into a side room to avoid him in the corridor. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," an employee muttered as she crossed his path, eyes fixed on the floor. He tried to recall her name. Sarah? Sandra? After 5 years, how was it possible that he didn't know the name of someone he saw every day? In the meeting room, the executives were already waiting. As soon as he walked in, he noticed how they all straightened in their chairs, as if receiving a mild electric shock. The smiles on their faces were as artificial as the plastic plants in the corner. "Quarterly report," announced Richards, the CFO, switching on the projector. "As you can see, our profit margins increased by 12% following the latest restructuring." Sterling realized he wasn't paying attention. His eyes wandered over the faces around the table, noticing for the first time the signs of chronic stress. Prematurely gray hair, worry lines, wedding bands nervously twisted on fingers. "Mr. Sterling," Richard's voice snapped him back. "Do you have any questions about the forecasts?" "No, go on," he answered automatically, though he had no idea what he'd just missed. His gaze was drawn to the window, where a lone bird perched on the ledge, free and oblivious to the human complexities unfolding behind the glass. "What about the layoffs in the development department?" asked Peterson, one of the veteran directors. "Are we sticking to the original schedule?" Sterling refocused on the room. Layoffs. More families who would have their lives upended to keep shareholders happy. How many Claires were among those people? Let's review that in the next meeting," Sterling said, to everyone's surprise. "I want a more detailed analysis of the long-term impact." Another deafening silence followed. It was the first time in years he hadn't immediately approved a cost-cutting measure. After the meeting, alone in his top-floor office, Sterling was lost in thought, gazing out at the city below. From that height, people looked like ants, small, insignificant. Was that how he had seen them? Was that how he saw Claire? His mother used to say that each person carried an entire universe inside them, full of unique dreams, fears, and stories. "Be kind," she'd say while cleaning tables at the restaurant where she worked for 30 years, "because everyone's fighting battles you know nothing about." The intercom rang, interrupting his reflections. "Mr. Sterling, your daughter is on line 2. He looked at the phone for a long moment. How long had it been since he really talked to Elizabeth, not just about money or business, but about her life, her dreams? "Tell her I'm in a meeting," he answered automatically, and immediately regretted it. The sun began to set over Manhattan, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. Even skyscrapers couldn't overshadow. Sterling stayed in his office long after the last employee left, contemplating the growing shadows and the lights flickering on across the city. For the first time in decades, Alexander Sterling was not only questioning his actions, but also who he had become. Claire's words had opened a crack in his carefully constructed armor, and memories and truths he had long suppressed were seeping through. On his desk, the report on planned layoffs lay open, its pages full of cold numbers representing real lives. Next to it was a framed photo of his mother smiling, her waitress apron immaculately clean despite her long work hours. "Forgive me, Mom," he murmured to the photo. "I think I forgot everything you tried to teach me." Night had fallen completely by the time he finally left the office. In the empty elevator, his reflection in the polished bronze mirror looked different, older, more tired, more human. Tomorrow would be another day, and for the first time in a long time, Alexander Sterling was unsure how to act. Sterling adjusted his Italian tie for the 3rd time before leaving his office. "Today will be different," he muttered to himself. After a night of reflection, he had decided to make changes, small changes to start with. He stopped in front of the cubicle area, where dozens of employees typed frantically at their computers. He cleared his throat. "Good morning, everyone," he announced, his voice sounding oddly formal even to his own ears. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Fingers stopped typing, conversations died, and 50 pairs of wide eyes turned toward him as though a lion had just walked into the office. Keep up the good work," he finished awkwardly, before retreating to his office, inwardly cursing himself for the pathetic attempt. His secretary, Martha, nearly spilled her coffee when he stopped by her desk. "Ms. Hamilton," he ventured, vaguely recalling her last name. "Stevens, sir," she corrected, tense. "Martha Stevens." "Right, Stevens." He paused uncomfortably. How is your day going?" Martha turned pale, as if searching for a trap in the question. "Fine, sir. The Phoenix Project report is on your desk." "No, I mean..." Sterling made a vague gesture. Do you have kids? Yes, sir. 3. She looked increasingly nervous. Great. That's great. Another awkward pause. Carry on. And he rushed to his office, feeling like a complete idiot. The morning only got worse with the Phoenix Project meeting, a $50 million initiative to develop new software. Jenkins, the project leader, presented the latest quarter's results. As you can see, we're slightly behind schedule, Jenkins stammered. Slightly? Sterling narrowed his eyes. We're 3 months late and 30% over budget. There were some communication issues between the teams. Communication issues. The old anger began to simmer. You've had 6 months to deliver results. If I may, Mr. Sterling, a young, firm voice cut through the air. All heads turned to Thomas Chen, a 26-year-old developer. Perhaps if management spent less time demanding daily reports and more time actually listening to the concerns of the tech team, we wouldn't be in this situation. A stunned silence followed. Jenkins looked ready to faint. Sterling felt his face heat up. Do you have any idea how much this project is costing, Mr. Chen, Thomas Chen? The young man held Sterling's gaze. And yes, I do. I also know how much we lose with a hierarchy that stifles innovation and open dialogue. For a moment, Sterling saw himself 30 years ago, young, idealistic, unafraid to challenge the system. When exactly had he become the kind of boss he used to fight against? Enough! The word exploded from his mouth before he could stop it. Who do you think you are to question methods that built an empire? All of you. He looked around the room. I have years of management experience, and you want to tell me how to run my own company? But as he shouted, part of him watched in horror at his own reaction. Claire's words echoed in his mind. True wealth isn't in the bank. Meeting adjourned, he declared abruptly, leaving the room without looking back. In his office, his hands trembled as he tried to pour himself a glass of water. The glass slipped, shattering on the floor. His heart pounded. His breathing was rapid and shallow. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. Mr. Sterling? Martha's voice came through the intercom. Mr. Chen is here. He says he needs to talk to you about the project. Not now. His voice came out strangled. What was happening to him? He'd never felt like this before. He loosened his tie, but the air still felt scarce. Cold sweat trickled down his forehead as chaotic thoughts flooded his mind. He was losing control of his company, of his life. Fragmented images flashed through his mind. The disapproval of the diner customers, the forced smiles of his employees, Thomas's courage, Claire's compassionate eyes. Claire. Something about her kindness, her authenticity, called to him like a lighthouse in the storm his life had become. Martha, he called through the intercom, his voice still trembling. Cancel my appointments for the rest of the day. But sir, the teleconference with Tokyo, all of them, he repeated. Please. Sterling grabbed his coat and left his office through the back exit, avoiding any encounters. In the elevator, he pressed his forehead against the cold mirror, trying to steady his breathing. Thomas's words still echoed in his mind, mingling with Claire's, a stifling hierarchy. True wealth. The hearts we touch. When he reached the parking garage, he dismissed his driver. He needed to think, and he knew exactly where to go. Perhaps the waitress who had shaken his world with a single phrase could help him figure out who he really was, and who he could still become. The sound of his Italian shoes echoed through the concrete as he walked toward the exit. For the first time in decades, Alexander Sterling had no plan, no control, only one certainty: he needed to return to that diner. The bell above the door of Sunshine's diner jingled as Sterling entered, his body still trembling slightly from the anxiety attack. The place looked different in daylight, brighter, livelier, but something, or rather someone, was missing. Can I help you? A different waitress approached, her name tag reading Betty. Claire, Sterling said, his voice more urgent than intended. I'm looking for Claire, Betty frowned, suspicious. Customers asking specifically for waitresses usually meant trouble. She's not working this shift. I need to speak with her. It's important. Sterling ran a hand through his gray hair in a nervous gesture that clashed with his impeccable $3,000 suit. Look, I can't just give out, please, he said. The word felt strange on his lips, so rarely used. She said something that changed my life. I need to thank her. Something in his vulnerability must have convinced Betty. She works at the Bluebird Cafe during the day, a few blocks from here. But if you cause any trouble... Thank you, Sterling interrupted, already heading for the door. The Bluebird. He knew the place. He passed it every day on his way to the office, though he'd never gone in. The October air felt colder than usual. Sterling quickened his pace, ignoring the looks from pedestrians, noting his expensive suit. His head throbbed, likely from the morning's stress. The buildings around him seemed to waver slightly. At the corner of 47th and Madison, the world started spinning. Sterling stopped, leaning on a lamppost. His vision blurred, cold sweat forming on his forehead despite the chill. The voices of passers-by sounded distant. "Sir, are you okay?" someone asked. Sterling tried to reply, but no words came. His chest tightened as though it were being crushed. A heart attack. At 52, it wouldn't be surprising, given his lifestyle. "Excuse me, let me through," a familiar voice cut through the small crowd forming around him. "Mr. Sterling?" Claire, even through his blurred vision, he recognized her worried face. What irony of fate. "Has anyone called an ambulance?" Claire asked the onlookers, as she helped Sterling sit on the steps of a store. "Breathe with me, Mr. Sterling, slowly." "No ambulance," he managed to murmur. The last thing he wanted was to end up in the gossip pages. Tech mogul collapses on the street. "Don't be stubborn," Claire gently scolded, loosening his tie. "You look as pale as a ghost." The approaching siren cut off any further protest. Sterling felt himself being lifted by paramedics, only vaguely aware of Claire answering questions about his condition. "I'm going with him," he heard her say. "I'm a friend." In the hospital, the fluorescent lights hurt his eyes. Doctors and nurses moved efficiently around him, hooking up monitors and checking vitals. Claire stayed close, a comforting presence amid the chaos. "Extremely high blood pressure," a doctor noted. "Clear signs of severe stress and exhaustion." Sterling wanted to argue, to say he was fine, that he had a company to run, but his body had finally rebelled after decades of neglect. "Do you have any relatives we can call?" a nurse asked. Sterling thought of his daughter Elizabeth, whom he hadn't seen in months, his ex-wife, who would probably laugh to hear of his predicament. "No," he answered quietly. "I'll stay with him," Claire said firmly. "At least until we're sure he's out of danger." Sterling looked at her, genuinely perplexed. "Why?" The word slipped out before he could stop it. Claire adjusted the chair by the bed, a small smile on her lips. "Because that's what decent people do, Mr. Sterling. They help each other. But I treated you terribly." "Yes, you did," she agreed, surprising him with her candor. "But that doesn't mean you deserve to go through this alone." Something inside Sterling broke at that moment. Decades of arrogance and forced self-sufficiency began to crack in the face of this genuine compassion. "Ms. Matthews," the doctor called Claire out of the room. Through the slightly open door, Sterling watched them talk, catching words here and there. Severe stress, heart risk, needs immediate lifestyle changes. When Claire returned, genuine concern shone in her eyes. Sterling realized he hadn't seen that look directed at him in years, not since his mother's passing. "The doctor says I need to stay under observation," he remarked, trying to sound casual. Claire nodded, picking up her purse. "I need to make a quick call. I'll be right back." Sterling overheard her in the corridor. "Hi, sweetie." "Yes. Mommy's going to be late today." "No, everything's fine. Just helping someone." "Make sure you take your meds, okay? Love you." When she returned, Sterling noticed the dark circles under her makeup, the small worried lines around her eyes. "Your daughter, Amy," Claire replied, a gentle smile brightening her tired face. "She's 11. Cystic fibrosis." Sterling felt a strange ache in his chest, different from the previous pain. It was empathy. "That must be tough," he said softly. "Being a single mom." "It is, but she's my strength. Every smile is worth all the overtime, all the double shifts." For the first time in his life, Sterling truly saw another person. Not as an employee, competitor, or rung on his ladder to success, but as a whole human being with her own struggles and triumphs. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, genuinely curious. Claire studied him for a moment. "Because sometimes we need reminding that everyone has a story, even arrogant billionaires who leave bad tips." Sterling couldn't suppress a small smile. "Alexander," he said gently. "You can call me Alexander." The heart monitor beeped steadily, marking not just his heartbeat but also, perhaps, the beginning of something new, a first crack in the fortress Alexander Sterling had built around his heart. The private hospital room cost more per night than many people earned in a month, but for the first time, that thought bothered Sterling. Through the large window, he watched the city's busy movement below, people hurrying, ambulances coming and going, families arriving and leaving, each of them carrying their own story, their own battles. Test results had come in that morning. Dangerously high blood pressure, elevated cortisol levels, signs of chronic exhaustion. "Your body is crying out for help, Mr. Sterling," the doctor had said. "If you continue at this pace, you won't make it to 60. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Martha, his secretary, had crafted a cover story for his absence, a sudden trip out of the country. No one could know that the mighty Alexander Sterling lay in a hospital bed, undone by his own lifestyle. A gentle knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Claire entered, carrying a bag that smelled comforting. "I thought you would have gone home by now," Sterling commented, surprised. "And miss seeing the all-powerful Mr. Sterling in a hospital gown." She smiled, placing the bag on the table. "Besides, nobody deserves to face hospital food alone." "You didn't have to." "Homemade soup," she interrupted, taking a container from the bag. "My grandma's recipe. She swore it cures anything." Sterling watched as she set everything up. A bowl of soup, a piece of homemade bread, even a cloth napkin. Simple gestures, yet laden with a humanity he had long forgotten. "Claire," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I'm sorry for what happened at the diner, for being, well, a complete jerk." She paused, studying him for a moment. "You know, after 15 years waiting tables, I've learned to tell when apologies are genuine, and this one sounds genuine." "It is," he confirmed, tasting the soup. It was delicious. "How's your daughter?" "Amy had a rough night," Claire sighed, sitting in the chair beside the bed. "Cystic fibrosis is like that. Some days are good, others not so much. But she's strong. Stronger than me, sometimes." "Must be scary," Sterling offered, surprising himself with the sincerity in his voice. "Facing this alone." "It is. But you know what's scarier?" Claire pulled out a photo on her phone, showing a bright-eyed girl who looked just like her. "The idea that she might need a treatment I can't afford. That's why the 2 jobs, the extra hours." Sterling felt a tightness in his chest. How much does the treatment cost?" "Insurance covers the basics." "But there's a new medication," she hesitated. $80,000 a year. It could change her life completely." Claire let out a humorless laugh. "That's probably what you spend on ties, isn't it?" Sterling lowered his gaze, ashamed. His last tie had cost $3,000. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because yesterday, when you collapsed in the street, do you know what I saw? Not the arrogant billionaire, not the feared boss. I saw a man alone, scared, exactly how I feel sometimes when Amy has a bad episode." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Sterling stirred his soup, pensive. "How do you do it?" he asked finally. "Do what?" "Keep hope. The smile. Your humanity. Even with all you're dealing with." Claire considered the question. "Maybe because I learned something you seem to have forgotten, Mr. Sterling. Life isn't measured by the zeros in our bank accounts, but by the moments we share and the lives we touch." She smiled. "By the way, that soup you're eating, Amy helped make it. She insisted on helping when she found out it was for the sick man Mommy is taking care of." Sterling felt his eyes burn. When was the last time someone had cooked for him out of pure kindness? "Alexander," he corrected gently. "Please call me Alexander." The hours passed in genuine conversation. Claire spoke about Amy, her dream of going back to school, the small joys she found even on hard days. Sterling found himself sharing about his humble childhood, his mother, the waitress, the promises he'd made to himself. and how they had somehow morphed into something unrecognizable over time. By the time the doctor came in late in the afternoon with his discharge paperwork, Sterling had silently made several decisions about changes in his life. "I have to go," Claire announced, checking the time. "Amy's waiting for me." "Let me call a car for you," Sterling offered, already reaching for his phone. "No, thanks," Claire smiled, slinging her purse over her shoulder. "Sometimes a crowded bus is just what we need to remind us we're part of something bigger than ourselves." Sterling insisted on accompanying her to the hospital exit, ignoring the nurse's protests that he use a wheelchair. Outside, the sun was setting over Manhattan in shades of pink and orange. Claire crossed the street to the bus stop, joining the small group already waiting. Sterling watched as she boarded the crowded bus, squeezing in between a construction worker and an elderly lady with shopping bags. Before the doors closed, Claire looked back and waved. For a moment, Sterling saw his own mother returning exhausted from another double shift, still finding the energy to smile at him. The bus pulled away, leaving Sterling alone on the hospital sidewalk. In his pocket, the discharge papers felt like a weight. Reduced stress, lifestyle changes, regular follow-ups. His driver was waiting with the limousine, but Sterling kept staring after the bus until it disappeared into Manhattan traffic. Right then and there, he made a promise not just to himself, but to his mother's memory and the unexpected kindness of Claire. Things would be different from now on. The question was, where to begin? Sterling's return to Sterling Tech was met with the same fearful reverence as always. Employees avoided his gaze, conversations died when he passed, and the silence in the elevator was deafening. But today, for the first time, it bothered him deeply. "Good morning, Martha," he greeted his secretary, who nearly dropped her coffee. "How's Amy?" Martha blinked in confusion. "Amy? Your daughter?" Sterling tried, recalling their awkward conversation before his hospitalization. "Sarah and Michael, sir. My kids are Sarah and Michael." "Oh." Sterling felt his face grow warm. "Right. Sorry for the mix-up." The look of shock on Martha's face at hearing him apologize almost made him chuckle. Almost. His first meeting of the day was about the Phoenix Project, the same one that had led to his confrontation with Thomas Chen. The conference room was tense when he entered, every executive bracing for another round of shouting and impossible demands. "Before we start," Sterling said, surprising everyone by remaining standing, "I'd like to try something different." He took a deep breath, remembering Claire's words about truly listening to people. "I want to hear from you, especially the technical team. What are the real obstacles we're facing?" An absolute silence followed. The executives exchanged nervous glances, as if expecting a trap. Thomas Chen, sitting at the back, was the first to speak up. "Mr. Sterling, I've prepared a presentation on an alternative approach that could address our communication problems and delays." Sterling nodded, taking a seat. "Show us, Mr. Chen." Thomas's presentation was brilliant in its simplicity, a complete restructuring of communication flow, cutting unnecessary bureaucracy and bringing the tech and management teams closer together. "This is ridiculous," Peterson, one of the senior directors, interrupted. "We can't just ignore the established hierarchy." Sterling felt the old flare of irritation but took a deep breath. "Why not?" "What do you mean, why not?" "Why can't we?" Sterling pressed, keeping his voice calm. "What we're doing now clearly isn't working. Maybe it's time we try something new." Thomas continued his presentation, detailing how the new structure could save time and resources. Sterling looked around the table. Some faces showed skepticism, others hope, all of them surprised by his openness. "Implement it," Sterling declared at the end. "Mr. Chen, you'll lead the transition. Peterson, work with him to ensure a smooth changeover." "But Mr. Sterling," Peterson began to protest, "have any of us ever gone down to the development department to see how things actually work?" Sterling asked, cutting him off. The silence answered for him. "Then that's where we'll start. Now." The elevator descended to the third floor, home to the development area. Sterling had never personally been there. He always made people come up to his office. The contrast to the executive floors was stark: cramped cubicles, fluorescent lighting, a noisy air conditioner. Mr. Sterling. A young developer nearly fell out of her chair upon seeing him. Is something wrong? Yes, Lisa, Thomas answered, reading her name tag. Mr. Sterling wants to see our operation. For the next hour, Sterling walked among the workstations, observing and listening. He learned that Lisa had developed an optimization system that saved hours of manual work, but never managed to get it noticed by the higher-ups. He met Miguel, who worked remotely with teams in India and had invaluable input on international communication. He watched Anna, a senior developer, passionately explain how small process tweaks could dramatically improve code quality. Why didn't I know about any of this before? Sterling murmured. Because nobody ever asked, Thomas answered simply. Back in his office at the end of the day, Sterling felt every muscle ache. He wasn't used to standing and walking that much, actually interacting with people, but there was something else, a new sensation he had almost forgotten. Purpose. Martha entered with a final stack of documents to sign. Sir, is everything all right? Sterling realized he was smiling, a genuine smile, not his usual corporate one. You know, Martha, I think it's starting to be. After she left, Sterling picked up his personal phone. There was an unread message from Claire. How was your first day back? He hesitated, then replied, different, exhausting, but maybe for the first time in years, heading in the right direction. Her answer came almost immediately. Baby steps, Alexander. Rome wasn't built in a day. Sterling glanced out the window of his office, watching the sun set over Manhattan. The same sunset he'd once watched with Claire outside the hospital, but now it seemed different, more meaningful. On his desk, among financial reports and million-dollar contracts, there was now a new item, a list of employees' names, along with notes about their lives, families, and ideas. It was a small start, but as Claire had said, small steps. His phone buzzed again. It was a message from Thomas with a preliminary timeline for changes in the Phoenix project. At the end, there was a note. Thanks for listening today. Sterling felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. But he also knew he needed help to stay on this path. He picked up the card the hospital doctor had given him of a therapist specializing in executive stress. Martha, he said through the intercom, could you schedule an appointment for me tomorrow? Outside his office, Martha smiled, noting that for the first time in years, her boss had said, could you, instead of schedule it. Sterling eyed the sleek building on Park Avenue, where, according to the card in his hand, Dr. Sarah Martinez had her practice. After 15 minutes of hesitation in the car, he finally mustered the courage to go in. The mirrored elevator reflected his image, still impeccable in his suit, but there was something different in his eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps. Martha had managed to schedule the appointment early in the morning before the workday at Sterling Tech. To avoid speculation, she'd suggested with a thoughtfulness Sterling had never noticed before. The waiting room was welcoming, with soft colors and a panoramic view of Manhattan. Gentle classical music played in the background. None of it could calm Sterling's anxiety. Mr. Sterling, Doctor. Martinez personally greeted him, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a serene demeanor. Please come in. The first few minutes were filled with the usual formalities, medical history, reason for consultation. Then came the first real question. What brings you here today? Sterling adjusted his tie, a nervous habit he'd recently developed. I had an episode at work. The doctor suggested therapy, and you agreed right away? No, Sterling laughed without humor, but let's say I've recently had an unexpected teacher. When Dr. Martinez arched an eyebrow curiously, Sterling found himself recounting Claire, the diner incident, his hospitalization. The words flowed more easily than he expected. And how do you feel about these changes you're trying to implement? She asked. Terrified, he admitted, the word escaping before he could stop it. It's like I'm dismantling everything I've built over the past 30 years. Or maybe, the therapist gently suggested, you're rebuilding something you lost along the way. The session ended with Sterling more reflective than he cared to admit. On his way to the office, he made an impulsive decision. Jenkins, he called the facilities manager as soon as he arrived. I want every executive office door replaced with glass doors, starting with mine. All of them? Jenkins asked, perplexed. All of them, and remove that ridiculous "wait until called" sign from my outer office. News of the open door policy spread like wildfire. For the first few days, it was more curiosity than practice. Employees lingered in the executive hallway, peering through the transparent doors, but no one actually dared to come in. Until one morning, Lisa, the developer he had met on his visit to IT, showed up at his door. "Mr. Sterling? I know you're busy, but about that optimization system I mentioned." An hour later, Sterling was amazed. The system Lisa had developed would not only save millions in internal processes, but also greatly improve employee experience. Why has this never reached me before? Lisa's uncomfortable silence was all the answer needed. How many other brilliant ideas had been stifled by the bureaucracy he himself had created? The following week, Sterling did something that shocked everyone. He showed up at the employee cafeteria during lunch hour. The silence that fell was almost tangible. "May I?" he asked, indicating an empty seat beside Miguel, the developer coordinating international teams. Conversation started off tense, but gradually flowed. Sterling discovered Miguel had created his own real-time translation system to ease communication with the India team. Even more impressive, he was teaching himself Hindi. "You should have seen their faces when I started speaking in their language," Miguel said, pride shining in his eyes. "It completely changed our dynamic." In the following days, Sterling made lunch in the cafeteria a habit. Each day, a different table, a new story to discover. Anna, the senior developer, turned out to be a refugee who learned programming in a camp. James, in tech support, was a musician who gave free guitar lessons to underprivileged kids. During one of those lunches, it finally happened. He got his first genuine smile from an employee. Sarah from HR laughed spontaneously at his remark about the terrible company coffee. "I'm sorry, sir," she began, startled by her own boldness. "Please," Sterling cut her off. "It's refreshing to hear laughter around here." Thomas Chen continued to stand out. His reorganization project showed impressive results, and his natural leadership inspired the team. During a particularly brilliant presentation, Sterling felt something odd, a mix of pride and nostalgia. "He reminds me a lot of you," Peterson commented after the meeting. "No," Sterling disagreed. "He's better." He never lost his humanity in the process. That night, rummaging through old drawers in his office, Sterling found a photo he hadn't seen in years. Himself, at 22, standing next to his mother in front of the restaurant where she worked. It was the day he got accepted into the engineering program. "I promise I'll make a difference, Mom," he had said then. "I'll help people like us." The memory hit him hard. At his next session with Dr. Martinez, he spoke about the photo, about his forgotten promises. "What happened to that idealistic young man?" she asked gently. "He got lost," Sterling admitted, "but I think maybe not completely." The next morning, he called a meeting with Thomas and the HR team. "I want to create a mentorship program," he announced. "Not just technical, but holistic. I want to identify talent at every level and give them the opportunities I had and the ones I didn't. This would completely change how we develop talent," Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with possibilities. "Mr. Chen," Sterling turned to Thomas, "I'd like you to lead this with me." "Me?" Thomas looked genuinely surprised. "You have something I lost along the way, the ability to lead with empathy. I need to relearn that, and I think we can learn together." That night, Sterling sent a message to Claire. "I discovered something today. Sometimes we have to go back in order to move forward." She replied quickly, "Amy asked about you. She said she hopes the hospital man is learning to smile more." Sterling glanced at the board in his office, now covered with employees' names, their stories, and unfulfilled dreams. Tomorrow, he would start working on new salary and benefits policies. But tonight he was content knowing he had taken the first real steps toward change. On his desk, the photo with his mother now occupied a place of honor. "I'm trying, Mom," he murmured to the picture. "I'm finally trying to keep that promise." Sterling was staring at the board in his office, now covered with employees' names and stories. When Martha walked in with the reports he'd requested, "Complete data on salaries and benefits across all departments, here, sir," she said, placing a hefty stack of folders on his desk. "And I found this in the old archives." She hesitated before handing him a time-worn document. "It's the original benefits policy from when you founded the company." Sterling took it with curiosity. There, in his own words from 25 years ago, it read, "Sterling Tech will be a place where talent and dedication are recognized and fairly rewarded, where every employee has the opportunity to grow and succeed." "When was the last time we reviewed these policies, Martha?" 8 years ago, sir. When Peterson took over as HR director." Sterling began scrutinizing the numbers, and the more he read, the darker his expression became. Base salaries had virtually stagnated, while executive bonuses had tripled. The health plan had been cut to the bare legal minimum. The professional development program existed only on paper. "Schedule a meeting with the entire board for tomorrow," Sterling ordered, "and invite Thomas and Sarah from HR as well." That night, Sterling barely slept, working on a detailed presentation. When he walked into the boardroom the next morning, he was ready for the resistance he knew he'd face. "This is insanity," Peterson was the first to protest after Sterling presented his proposed changes. "A general 20% wage increase for base salaries, extending health coverage to dependents. You'll destroy our profit margin." "Interesting that you mention profit margins, Peterson," Sterling replied calmly, switching to a new slide. "Because since we implemented our initial workplace changes, productivity has risen by 15%. The Phoenix project, under Mr. Chen's revised structure, is 3 weeks ahead of schedule and 12% under budget." "Coincidence?" another director grumbled. "No," Sarah from HR interjected, surprising everyone with her firmness. "Motivated and valued employees produce more and better. It's basic." "And there's more," Sterling continued. "I'm implementing an innovation suggestion program. Any employee can submit ideas directly for evaluation without going through traditional hierarchy. That's an invitation to chaos." Peterson slammed the table. "Isn't this open-door policy enough of a joke already?" "A joke?" Thomas joined the argument. "Lisa's optimization system, which we discovered thanks to that policy, will save us $2 million a year. Imagine how many other ideas are out there, stifled by bureaucracy." The meeting remained tense for hours. In the end, Sterling managed to get most of the changes approved, but he knew he'd made some powerful enemies in the process. He needed fresh air and advice. The Bluebird Cafe was quiet at that hour. Claire smiled when she saw him enter, that genuine smile that had first cracked his arrogant shell. "You look worried," she observed, pouring him coffee into a simple ceramic mug. Sterling recounted the changes he was implementing and the pushback he faced. Claire listened intently, nodding occasionally. "You know," she said, "when Amy was diagnosed, the doctors gave me advice that applies to any tough change. Don't look at the entire mountain at once. Focus on the next step." "What do you think my next step should be?" Claire thought for a moment. "You talked about raising wages, improving benefits, but you know what many working mothers worry about most? Having nowhere to leave their children." It was as if a light bulb went on in Sterling's mind. "A daycare," he murmured. "We could convert that space on the second floor." "See?" Claire smiled. "Sometimes the best solution comes from the most unexpected perspectives." Back at the company, Sterling called a meeting with Martha, Thomas, and the infrastructure team. Within 2 weeks, the daycare project was ready. A modern, safe space with qualified caregivers. But that's not all, Sterling announced at a general assembly. The daycare will be free for employees earning up to 6 times the minimum wage, and we'll have a progressive contribution system for everyone else. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause. Sarah from HR had tears in her eyes. Sterling remembered she was a single mother of 2. Results appeared quickly. Absenteeism dropped. Productivity kept rising. The atmosphere in the company was lighter, more collaborative. "This quarter's profits," Peterson threw a report onto Sterling's desk a few weeks later. "They're up 22%. Apparently I was wrong." Sterling smiled. "No, Peterson, you were right to care about the numbers. We just needed to learn how to see beyond them." That night, before leaving, Sterling stopped by the new daycare. Children played happily while parents finished their shifts, relieved to know their kids were safe. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire. "Amy got excited when I told her about the daycare. She said you're turning into a nice boss." Sterling laughed, but his laughter stopped as he noticed something odd in some documents on Peterson's desk, left in his open office. Numbers that didn't add up, suspicious transfers. His heart pounded. Could it be that, while he was trying to make the company a better place, something shady was happening right under his nose? But that discovery would have to wait for another day. Tonight, Sterling just wanted to appreciate the children's laughter in the daycare, the proud smile on Thomas's face as he presented Phoenix project results, and the feeling that, at last, he was living up to those old promises. The numbers didn't lie. Sterling stared at the spreadsheets on his computer for the 10th time, reviewing the files he found in Peterson's office. At first, they seemed like minor accounting discrepancies, but the more he dug, the clearer and more disturbing the pattern became. Millions of dollars had been siphoned off over the past 5 years through inflated contracts and shell companies. The scheme was sophisticated, hidden behind layers of red tape he himself had created by delegating everything to his directors. "Martha," he called through the intercom, "I need you to find Thomas discreetly." As he waited, Sterling couldn't shake the thought of how his obsession with results and negligence of details had allowed a perfect environment for this kind of corruption to thrive. Thomas arrived 15 minutes later to find Sterling surrounded by scattered documents. "Close the door," Sterling said, then reconsidered. "Actually, let's talk elsewhere." In the cafe across the street, away from any prying ears, Sterling laid out his discoveries. "My God," Thomas murmured, flipping through the documents. "This explains why Peterson and his group have been so resistant to changes. Transparency is the enemy of corruption. I need your help, Thomas. You and your team have access to internal systems. I need to know how deep this goes." "It's risky," Thomas warned. "If they find out we're investigating, I know. That's why I'm giving you the chance to say no." Thomas smiled. The old Sterling wouldn't have asked. He would have ordered. He paused. "I'm in, but we need someone else." "Lisa," Sterling suggested immediately. "Her optimization system has probably already collected data that can help us." Over the following weeks, the small team worked in secret. Lisa uncovered suspicious patterns in financial transactions. Thomas mapped out a network of fake companies. Sterling contributed his knowledge of internal processes and the people involved. But not all the secrecy in the world could hide the changes. Sterling began noticing odd looks, conversations dying as he approached. Until one night, passing by Peterson's office, he heard voices. "Sterling is weak." Peterson's voice was unmistakable. "All this talk about humanizing the company and listening to employees, it's our chance to take control. The board is uneasy with these changes." Another voice, Roberts, from finance, said, "If we present the right evidence that he's unstable, losing his grip on the company." Sterling felt his blood run cold. It wasn't just about the embezzlement. This was a conspiracy to remove him from power, using his own reforms against him. That night, he couldn't sleep. Peterson's words echoed in his mind. Sterling is weak. Was that what compassion meant in the corporate world? Weakness. The next morning, he drove to the Bluebird Cafe. He needed perspective, and he knew exactly where to find it. Claire was wiping the counter when he walked in. One look at his face was enough. 15-minute break, she announced to her co-worker, leading Sterling to a back table. Sterling told her everything, the corruption, the conspiracy, his fears. "You know what's ironic?" he said bitterly. "Part of me wants to be the old Sterling again. It would be so much easier to just crush them all with my power, ignore the evidence, keep the status quo." "But that's not what you really want," Claire observed. "No, but what if they're right? What if all these changes, this humanization, really made me weaker?" Claire stayed silent for a moment, pouring more coffee. "Amy has a classmate who was bullied. Do you know what she did? She organized other kids to protect him. The principal said it was an extraordinary act of kindness." She paused. "But I saw strength, because it takes far more strength to do what's right than what's easy." Sterling absorbed her words. "But I might lose everything." Or you might gain something much more valuable, Claire smiled. Besides, from what you've told me, you're not fighting this alone. Back at the office, Sterling gathered Thomas and Lisa. We'll need irrefutable evidence, he declared. They'll try to bring me down at the board meeting, so we have to be prepared. We already have plenty, Lisa said, showing her laptop. But there's more. Peterson started erasing records. Luckily, Thomas smiled, we made backups. In the following week, they worked tirelessly, compiling a solid case. Every suspicious transaction, every fraudulent contract, every incriminating email was documented and organized. Late on Friday night, alone in his office, Sterling took out the photo of his mother from the drawer. She smiled in her waitress uniform, her eyes shining with pride on his graduation day. "It's funny, Mom," he murmured to the photo. "I spent years building this company, thinking I was fulfilling our dream. But maybe the real dream wasn't about money or power. Maybe it was about making a difference, like you did, one small act of kindness at a time." His phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. "All set for Monday." Sterling put the photo away, but kept his mother's words in his heart. "Character isn't what you do when everyone is watching, son. It's what you do when no one is." Monday would be the ultimate test of that character. The boardroom had never felt so imposing. Dark mahogany walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, the long black marble table, all designed to intimidate. Sterling adjusted his tie, feeling the weight of the documents in his briefcase. "Sir," Martha whispered, hurrying in, "everyone's here, and something odd. Peterson brought lawyers." Sterling nodded. He'd expected this. "Martha, whatever happens today, I want you to know I appreciate your loyalty all these years." Her eyes widened at the gravity of his words. "Sir, And please," he smiled, "after today, call me Alexander." The room was full when he entered. 12 board members. Peterson and his allies, their lawyers, all in expensive suits and grave expressions. Sterling spotted Thomas discreetly stationed at one end, laptop open. "Gentlemen," Sterling began, but Peterson cut him off. "Before we start, I have an urgent matter to present," Peterson signaled to one of the lawyers, who handed out folders. "Evidence that Alexander Sterling is no longer fit to lead this company." A murmur spread as the board members scanned the documents. "Erratic behavior," Peterson went on, "drastic, reckless management changes, emotional decisions jeopardizing our profitability. Sterling Tech needs strong leadership, not an amateur philanthropist." "Interesting choice of words, Peterson," Sterling replied calmly, "especially the part about jeopardizing our profitability." With a nod, Thomas projected charts on the screen. "Since we started these new policies, our productivity has gone up by 27%. Employee turnover is down 65%. Customer satisfaction is at an all-time high." "These numbers are manipulated," Peterson protested. "Like you manipulated other numbers for the past 5 years, Sterling asked quietly. The ensuing silence was deafening. Sterling made another gesture, and Thomas displayed new data, the corruption evidence, meticulously compiled. Overpriced contracts, shell companies, embezzlement, Sterling listed. "You're not trying to overthrow me because I'm weak. You're trying because for the first time in years I'm actually paying attention." "This is absurd," Peterson stood. "He's clearly paranoid." The boardroom door opened, and Lisa entered carrying more documents. "Sorry for the delay. I was finalizing the forensic analysis of our servers. It's amazing how people trying to delete digital records leave so many traces." Peterson's lawyers began whispering urgently to him. "Members of the board," Sterling said, rising to his feet, his voice resolute. "When I founded this company, I had a dream, not just to create groundbreaking technology, but to create a place where people could thrive, where excellence and integrity went hand in hand." He paused, making eye contact with each person in the room. "Somewhere along the way, I lost that dream. I turned this company into a money-making machine, sacrificing our humanity in the process. And in that environment, people like Peterson found a way to prosper, not through innovation or hard work, but through corruption and manipulation." Peterson tried to interrupt, but Sterling raised a hand. You say I've become weak. That's showing compassion, treating employees like human beings. Creating a decent work environment is a sign of weakness. Well, let me tell you something about strength. Sterling walked to the window, gazing at the city below. Strength isn't about crushing others. It's not about ruling through fear. True strength is having the courage to admit mistakes, to change, to do the right thing even when it's hard. And in the past few months, I learned that lesson in the most unexpected way, from a waitress who had the courage to hold up a mirror to my face. Turning back to the board, Sterling continued, "This company is stronger than ever. Not despite these changes, but because of them. And if you want to remove me for trying to make it a better place, for fixing years of neglect and corruption, then do it. But know that I'm not alone in this fight." As if on cue, the door opened again. Sarah from HR entered, followed by dozens of employees, developers, analysts, maintenance staff, who lined up quietly along the walls. "These are the people who build this company every day," Sterling said, "and they deserve leaders who honor their work, their dedication, their humanity." One of the oldest board members, Dr. Harrison, stood slowly. "Mr. Peterson, you and your associates are suspended from your duties pending a full investigation." Turning to Sterling, he said, "Alexander, carry on. This board stands with you." The room erupted in applause from the employees. Peterson and his allies were escorted out by security. As the room cleared, Thomas approached Sterling. "That speech, it was incredible." Sterling smiled. "I learned from the best. By the way, excellent work orchestrating all this." "It was a team effort," Thomas replied, a strange glint in his eyes. There's something I need to tell you." "Tomorrow," Sterling said gently. "We've had enough drama for one day." Alone in his office later, Sterling picked up the phone. Claire answered on the second ring. "We did it," he said simply. "I knew you would," she replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Amy's here. She wants to say hi." "Hi, Mr. Sterling," the girl's cheerful voice came through. "Mommy said you were a hero today." Sterling felt his eyes grow moist. "No, Amy. The real heroes are people like your mum, who taught me what really matters." After hanging up, Sterling gazed at the city lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a full investigation of the corruption, the restructuring of the board, and apparently an important talk with Thomas. But today, for the first time in a long while, Alexander Sterling was at peace with his choices and the man he was becoming. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Sterling Tech, casting golden patterns on the marble floors. The building still vibrated with the events of the previous day, the attempted coup, the corruption revelations, the moral victory that had reshaped the company. But Sterling's mind was on something else. Thomas's unspoken words, that significant look in his eyes when he said they needed to talk. In his office, Sterling tried to focus on the investigation reports about Peterson and his allies, but his thoughts kept drifting back to Thomas. There was something familiar about the young man from day one, something that went beyond his professional competence or moral integrity. "Martha," he called through the intercom, finally giving up the pretense of working. "Could you ask Mr. Chen to come to my office when he's free?" "Actually, sir," Martha replied, "he's already here. Arrived about 10 minutes ago, but he said he needed a moment." Sterling noted the nervousness in Martha's voice. She was attuned to people's moods. "Send him in!" Thomas walked in carrying an old leather folder, its edges worn by time and use. He looked like he hadn't slept, with dark circles under his eyes and his usually immaculate suit slightly rumpled. "Please have a seat, Thomas," Sterling offered. Noticing how tense the young man seemed, a stark contrast to his usual confident self. "You mentioned yesterday you had something to tell me." Thomas nodded, placing the folder on the desk with trembling hands. "Before I begin, I need you to know something. Everything I've done these past months, supporting your changes, helping with the investigation, wasn't because of this, it was because I believed it was right." Sterling felt a knot form in his stomach. "For you're worrying me, Thomas." Carefully, Thomas opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. The paper was yellowed at the edges, but the image was clear. Shockingly so for Sterling. It was him, 26 years younger, at a college formal. Beside him, smiling radiantly, stood Jennifer Chen. Jennifer, the name escaped his lips like a prayer, or maybe a confession. Your mother. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas pulled out more items, old letters, newspaper clippings about Sterling Tech's rise, a birth certificate. She showed me this photo when I turned 16, Thomas began, voice controlled but charged with emotion. Along with your letters, the last ones you sent before leaving for San Francisco, Sterling finished, his face draining of color. To start Sterling Tech, I never knew. She was pregnant? Thomas gave a humorless smile. She tried to tell you. Multiple times, but you'd already changed your number and your address. You were too busy building your empire to worry about a college ex-girlfriend. Memories overwhelmed Sterling like an avalanche. Jennifer Chen, brilliant, determined, with a smile that lit any room. 2 intense years of a relationship in the engineering program, sharing dreams of changing the world through technology, late nights studying, future plans, promises. And then the San Francisco offer, the golden chance. The decision to end everything, convinced that relationships were anchors that would hold him back from his greatest potential. Why now? Sterling asked, his voice hoarse. Why not come forward sooner? Thomas walked to the window, a gesture so familiar it made Sterling's heart ache. Mom made me promise I'd forge my own path, that if we ever met, it would be because of my merits, not the Chen or Sterling name. He turned to face Sterling. When I saw the opening at Sterling Tech, I knew it was my chance. I hadn't planned to tell you, but after these months, after seeing your changes, working with you, it felt wrong to keep it hidden. Sterling stood abruptly, joining Thomas at the window. Reflected in the glass were father and son side by side, the resemblance now undeniable. The same determined profile, the same stance, even the same furrowed brow in moments of worry. 26 years, Sterling murmured, voice breaking. I missed 26 years of your life. Not all were missed, Thomas replied softly. Mom raised me well. Taught me about integrity, hard work, compassion, values you seem to be rediscovering now. Jennifer. Sterling hesitated. How is she? She's fine. A tenured engineering professor in Seattle. She never married. Thomas paused. She always said I inherited your determination and her sense of justice. Sterling needed air. He needed to think. He needed... Claire. Thomas, I need time to process this. Can we continue this conversation later? At the door, Thomas stopped. You know what's most surprising these past months? Seeing the man my mother met in college, the one who wanted to make the world a better place, still alive somewhere inside you. The Bluebird Cafe was bustling when Sterling walked in, but Claire immediately sensed something was off. Years of waiting tables had given her a sixth sense for reading people. Taking a 15 Mai, she announced, leading Sterling to their usual back table, where so many important talks had already taken place. Sterling poured it all out, the relationship with Jennifer, the abrupt end, Thomas, 26 lost years. Claire listened silently, occasionally giving his hand a supportive squeeze. How do I do this, Claire? He asked finally, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. How do you suddenly become a father after 26 years? The same way you're learning to be a better leader, one day at a time, with honesty and an open heart. She hesitated. Alexander, there's something I also need to tell you. Claire then shared news about a new treatment for Amy, an experimental therapy that promised not only to manage cystic fibrosis symptoms, but possibly alter the course of the disease. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Sterling asked, the pain in his eyes now mingled with concern. Because I didn't want our friendship to be about money, she answered simply. You were on an important journey of self-discovery, and I didn't want to... Claire, Sterling cut in, taking her hands across the table. Let me help. Not as a billionaire trying to buy redemption, but as someone who's learned from you the real value of human connection. Claire began, but was interrupted by the cafe door opening. Mom! Amy entered, her face lighting up at seeing Sterling, and behind her, surprisingly, was Thomas. I found this young lady outside, Thomas explained with a kind smile. She recognized me from the photos you showed her. Miss Claire. Sterling watched as events unfolded. Claire hugging Amy, Thomas kneeling to talk to the girl, their shared laughter, an unlikely family united in a simple cafe. About the treatment, Sterling said quietly. Please, Claire, let me do this. Not out of guilt or obligation, but because you taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about the hearts we touch along the way. Thomas watched with glistening eyes. He's different now, isn't he? He asked Claire. From the man you first met at the diner. No, Claire smiled, wisdom in her gaze. He just found his way back to who he always was. Sterling looked at his son, the words still strange and wonderful in his mind, and at Claire and Amy. In a matter of hours, his life had changed again. But this time, unlike the ambitious young man who left Jennifer behind, he was ready to face the consequences of his past and present choices. Thomas, he called, voice thick with emotion. Would you like to have dinner with me tonight? We have 26 years to start catching up on. I'd like that, Thomas smiled, and for the first time, Sterling saw vulnerability in his eyes as well. Dad! The word hit Sterling like a wave, making his eyes burn. Claire squeezed his shoulder supportively, while Amy chatted excitedly about how awesome it was that Mr. Thomas was Mr. Sterling's son, and that they were basically a family now. Through the cafe window, Sterling could see Manhattan's relentless pace, people rushing to meetings, cars honking, life carrying on as usual. But inside that small space, time seemed to stand still, allowing a man to confront his past and glimpse a different future, a future where redemption wasn't just possible, but was already happening. One heart at a time. Mount Sinai Hospital had that peculiar atmosphere of major medical centers, a blend of hope and apprehension, victories and losses, beginnings and endings. Sterling, who would normally have a private suite on the top floor, found himself in the regular pediatric ward, sitting in an uncomfortable plastic chair beside Claire. Amy was surprisingly calm for an 11-year-old about to begin an experimental treatment. She flipped through a comic book while they waited for the nurse, occasionally making remarks that made everyone smile despite the tension. Ms. Matthews, a nurse appeared with a clipboard. We're ready to begin the preliminary procedures. Claire squeezed Sterling's hand in a silent gesture of gratitude. He had not only arranged for the treatment, but insisted on using his influence to secure the best possible medical team. Can I come along? Sterling asked, surprising even himself. Of course, Claire smiled. Amy would love it, wouldn't you? Yes, the girl exclaimed. You can tell me more stories about when you were young and met baby Thomas. Sterling felt a pang. Actually, Amy, he began, but was cut off by Thomas's arrival, slightly out of breath from rushing down the hospital halls. Sorry I'm late, he said. The meeting with the legal team about Peterson went long. The silence that followed was loaded with unspoken emotion, father and son still navigating their new relationship. Amy broke the tension. Cool. Now I have two storytellers. As Amy underwent initial tests, Sterling and Thomas remained in the waiting area. The silence between them was heavy with unanswered questions and long overdue explanations. Your mother, Sterling finally said. She used to sing when she was nervous, a Mandarin song her grandmother taught her. Thomas looked surprised. She still does. Especially when she's cooking. Her ginger chicken was amazing. It still is. Thomas smiled. She mentions you sometimes. Not angrily, you know. More like wistful. Sterling closed his eyes, memories flooding back. I was so focused on proving myself, on building something big. I didn't realize I already had something precious. Why didn't you ever look for her after that, when you were already successful? Shame, maybe, or fear. The more time passed, the harder it seemed to go back. Sterling paused. But mostly because I became someone she wouldn't recognize. Someone I barely recognized myself. Claire returned at that moment, quietly taking a seat beside them, not wanting to interrupt. Amy's fine, she reported, once they noticed her. The doctors are optimistic about the treatment. Sterling saw that Thomas had unconsciously adopted the same posture he did, leaning forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. small gestures that loudly proclaimed their genetic connection. "You know," Claire said softly, "sometimes the strongest bonds are the ones we choose to rebuild, not the ones we're simply given." "How do you do it?" Sterling asked. "Being a single mom, dealing with all this." "One day at a time, with lots of love and patience." She smiled. "Exactly what you'll need to rebuild your relationship with Thomas." Thomas blushed slightly. "I'm not a kid anymore." "No," Sterling agreed. "You're an extraordinary man, and that's all thanks to your mother. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try being the father I should have been 26 years ago." "And how do you plan to do that?" Thomas asked, his tone softer than usual. "Honestly, I have no idea. But I've learned recently that sometimes the most important thing isn't having all the answers, but being willing to search for them with the people who matter." Claire watched the exchange with a smile. The arrogant man who'd left a $1 tip seemed like he belonged to another life, another dimension. Amy returned a few hours later, tired but cheerful after her first treatment session. "Look, Mr. Sterling, they gave me a star sticker." "That's a very special star," Sterling smiled, "for a very special girl." "Did you know Thomas used to get star stickers when he was little as too?" Claire chimed in, sensing an opportunity. "Why don't you tell her about it, Alexander?" Sterling looked at Thomas, who gave a gentle laugh. "Actually, Mum told me you collected stars in college. You had an astronomy map on your ceiling." "You remember that?" Sterling asked, surprised. "Mom kept a lot of stories. Good stories. I think she wanted me to know both sides of my father, the man she loved and the man you became." Sterling felt his eyes fill with tears. "And which one do you see now?" "Maybe a bit of both. And maybe that's not a bad thing." The day at the hospital became an unexpected journey of reconnection. Between Amy's treatment intervals, Sterling and Thomas shared stories and memories, discovering shared traits beyond genetics, like a mutual love for chess and the same habit of needing something sweet with coffee, even the identical nervous tick of adjusting their ties under stress. Claire watched them, occasionally offering her unique perspective and easing difficult moments with her straightforward wisdom. "It's funny," she remarked during dinner in the hospital cafeteria, "how life sometimes gives us second chances disguised as first meetings." Sterling looked at Thomas, who was folding paper airplanes with Amy. "Do you think I deserve this second chance?" "It's not about deserving," Claire answered. "It's about what you choose to do with it." When night fell and Amy finally drifted off in her hospital bed, Sterling found himself alone with Thomas in the quiet corridor. "I need to head home," Thomas said. "But can we do this again? Maybe dinner tomorrow?" "I'd love that." Sterling hesitated before adding, "Son." Thomas smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "Good night, Dad." After Thomas left, Sterling returned to Claire, who was watching Amy sleep. "Thank you," she whispered, "not just for the treatment, but for today." It was important for Amy to see that families can come in many different forms. "I should be the one thanking you," Sterling replied, "for showing me that a true legacy isn't about buildings or bank accounts, but about the hearts we touch and the bonds we choose to strengthen." Outside the hospital, the city carried on at its frantic pace, but inside that room, 4 lives had become intertwined in ways none of them could have predicted. And perhaps Sterling thought that was the real miracle. Not the experimental treatment or the second chances, but the human heart's capacity to expand and embrace new forms of love and connection. The Sterling Tech conference room was unrecognizable. Where once stood an imposing marble table, there was now a circular arrangement of desks designed to foster collaboration. The walls, once adorned with expensive art, now displayed employees' projects and family photos. "The Green Program will be our first major initiative post-restructuring," Thomas explained to the revamped board of directors. "We'll make Sterling Tech the first fully carbon-neutral tech company in the country." Sterling watched his son with barely concealed pride. In just 3 months since Peterson's downfall, Thomas had emerged as one of the most respected voices in the company, seamlessly blending technical innovation with social awareness in ways Sterling had never imagined. "The initial costs will be significant," one of the new directors noted. "Yes," Thomas agreed, "but the return, both financial and social, will be exponential. Lisa, now Director of Innovation, projected a series of graphs. Our forecasts show that within 5 years, the savings on energy and carbon credits will not only offset the initial investment, but generate a surplus we can reinvest in social programs. Sterling smiled, remembering his conversation with Claire that morning at the cafe. So you know what's most impressive, she had said while handing him his coffee. Not just that the company is changing, but how this change is inspiring others. The Bluebird Cafe had become his morning refuge. 3 times a week before work, Sterling sat at the same stool, sipping coffee and talking with Claire about everything, from the company's new policies to Amy's small victories with her treatment. Employees aren't just numbers on a payroll, Claire commented once. They're people with dreams, stories, and untapped potential. That conversation had sparked the next major change at Sterling Tech. The Horizon program, Sterling announced at the current meeting, after Thomas's presentation. A comprehensive scholarship fund, not just for employees' children, but for the employees themselves. Sarah from HR presented the details: technical courses, undergraduate programs, MBAs, even study abroad opportunities. The idea is that any employee, at any level, has the chance to grow. And not just that, Thomas added. We'll form partnerships with public schools and NGOs to identify young talent in underserved communities. We'll offer mentorship, resources, and eventually job opportunities. The transformation went beyond formal programs. The overall atmosphere in the company had changed drastically. Doors, both literal and figurative, remained open. Employees felt free to share ideas, voice concerns, propose solutions. One afternoon, Sterling discovered a long line of people outside his office. "What's going on?" he asked Martha. "They're the mentees," she smiled. "Ever since you started offering mentoring sessions to young entrepreneurs, the waiting list keeps growing." Sterling had begun the mentorship program almost by accident. After a talk at a public high school, a young girl approached him with an idea for an app to help people with disabilities find work. He was so impressed by her vision and drive that he offered to guide her personally. Word got out. Soon he was devoting 2 afternoons a week to mentoring young people from modest backgrounds who had big dreams but limited resources. "You're creating a different kind of legacy," Claire observed during one of their morning coffees. "Not just financial success by Martas, but social transformation." Sterling thought of his own journey, from a poor boy with big dreams to an arrogant billionaire, and finally, to the man he was becoming now. "I learned from the best," he replied, making Claire blush. Claire's simple wisdom had become integral to the company's new philosophy. Sterling often found himself asking, what would Claire say about this, before making major decisions? When the company implemented a mental health program for employees, it was inspired by Claire's observation about how small daily stresses can accumulate into big crises. When they created a daycare center at each branch, not just at headquarters, it was because Claire mentioned how mothers in other cities faced the same struggles she did. "Mr. Sterling," a young intern poked her head into the office, timidly. "I have an idea to improve our recycling system, but I'm not sure if—" "Come in," he smiled. "And please, call me Alexander." The changes began drawing outside attention. Business magazines that once highlighted only Sterling Tech's profits now wrote about its cultural transformation. From profit to purpose, the silent revolution at Sterling Tech became a Forbes cover story. Yet the real measure of success wasn't in the headlines. It was in the genuine smiles employees wore coming into work. It was in the stories of transformed lives, the security guard who earned an engineering degree, the receptionist who developed a digital literacy program for seniors, the kid from a low-income neighborhood who became a project leader. One afternoon, after a particularly inspiring session with his mentees, Sterling paid a surprise visit to the Bluebird Cafe. "I need your help with something bigger," he said to Claire. "Bigger than turning one of the country's largest tech companies into a model of social responsibility," she teased. "I want to create an institute, something beyond Sterling Tech. A place that combines education, technology, and opportunity for young people who, like me once, have dreams too big for their small pockets." Claire studied him for a moment. And where do I fit in? I want you to lead the Institute's social program. Nobody understands better than you how small changes can transform lives. Alexander, I don't have the credentials for that. I'm just an extraordinary woman who changed a billionaire's life with one simple line about a tip, he finished. Imagine what you could do with real resources at your disposal. That night, in his office, Sterling gazed over the city through the windows. Sterling Tech now occupied 3 buildings in central Manhattan, but its impact reached far beyond physical space. Thomas entered, carrying the latest reports on the green program. It's amazing how much has changed in such a short time, he remarked, joining his father by the window. Sometimes, Sterling replied, you have to lose your way completely to find the right path. His phone buzzed with a message from Claire. Amy just won the school science fair. She says she wants to be a scientist at Sterling Tech someday. Sterling smiled, showing the message to Thomas. You know, Thomas said, when I joined the company, I wanted to prove my own worth, show I was more than just your son. Now I see the real worth is in how we use our privileges to help others. Your mother raised you well, Sterling responded with pride. Sterling Tech's transformation was far from over, but the way forward was clear. It was a path lit not by financial gain alone, but by the light of changed lives, created opportunities, and fulfilled dreams. And it all started with a $1 tip and a waitress wise enough to see beyond a billionaire's arrogance. The Plaza Hotel's ballroom glowed with understated elegance. Unlike the extravagant corporate galas of the past, this Sterling Tech celebration felt warm and inclusive. Employees from every level mingled easily, their families welcomed into the festivities. Sterling straightened his tie, the same one he'd worn the day he met Claire, while watching Thomas finalize his presentation. Nervous? He asked his son. A bit, Thomas admitted. But it's the good kind of nerves, like when Mom came to see me lead a meeting for the first time. Jennifer had flown in from Seattle for the event, her presence a surprise orchestrated by Thomas. Now she chatted happily with Claire near the stage. The 2 women who had each in their own way transformed Alexander Sterling. The chatter died down as Sterling took the stage. For a moment, he surveyed the faces in the crowd, faces he now recognized, stories he had learned to appreciate. A year ago, he began, I thought I knew everything about value, about success, about leadership. He paused meaningfully. I have never been so wrong in my life. Soft laughter rippled through the room. The true transformation of Sterling Tech didn't begin in a boardroom or with high-priced consultants or revolutionary strategies. It began in a simple diner, with a $1 tip and a waitress wise enough to see through the arrogance of a billionaire. His eyes found Claire in the audience, who smiled through tears. To present the tangible results of this transformation, I invite our Director of Sustainable Innovation, Thomas Chen, who also happens to be, his voice wavered slightly, my son. Thomas stepped onto the stage to a warm applause. His presentation was impressive. Record profits, near zero employee turnover, social programs impacting thousands of lives, international recognition as the sector's most sustainable company. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Thomas concluded. The real story is in the lives transformed, in the second chances offered, in the dreams fulfilled. Sterling returned to the stage, now accompanied by Claire. Claire Matthews isn't just the person who set this transformation in motion. She embodies everything we aspire to be as a company, resilient, compassionate, focused on what truly matters. He turned to her. That's why I'm thrilled to announce that Claire will be our new Director of Human Development and Social Impact. Claire raised her hands to her mouth in shock. In the audience, Amy jumped up and down with excitement. But that's not all, Sterling continued. I'm also pleased to announce that Sterling Tech has acquired Sunshine's Diner. A ripple of surprise went through the room, not to demolish or modernize it, but to transform it into the first Sterling Training and Development Center, a place where young people from underserved communities can learn technology, entrepreneurship, and most importantly, that their dreams are valid, no matter where they come from. Tears now streamed freely down Claire's face. I accept, she said into the mic, her voice shaky but resolute. On one condition, that we keep serving the best coffee in town. The crowd laughed and applauded. And to symbolize this new era, Sterling gestured, and a curtain was pulled back to reveal a framed display, something to remind us where it all began. There, encased in crystal, was the $1 tip with a golden inscription. True wealth lies in the lives we transform. The rest of the night was a celebration of human connections. Sterling watched with satisfaction as Jennifer and Claire exchanged stories. Amy showed her latest report card to Thomas. Employees shared their dreams and plans with genuine enthusiasm. The next morning, before Sunshine's Diner opened for its final day as just a diner, Sterling, Thomas, and Claire stood behind the counter, pouring coffee for employees who had arrived early to help plan the renovation. "You know what's funny?" Claire remarked as she refilled a cup. "That day, when you left the $1 tip, I really thought I'd never see you again." "Fate has an interesting sense of humor," Thomas commented, fumbling with the espresso machine under Claire's guidance. "It wasn't fate," Sterling corrected softly. "It was choices. Claire's choice to show compassion instead of resentment. Your choice, Thomas, to build your own path. My choice to finally listen and change." A young employee approached the counter shyly. "Mr. Sterling, I just wanted to say thank you. Because of the new scholarship program, my sister will be the first in our family to go to college." Sterling smiled, handing her a cup of coffee. "What's her dream?" "She wants to be an engineer, like you and Mr. Thomas." Sterling exchanged a meaningful glance with his son. "Well, let her know we have an internship waiting for her when she's ready." As the sun rose over Manhattan, lighting the cozy interior of the diner, Sterling looked at the framed dollar on the wall. Soon this space would become something new, just as he had. But its essence would stay the same, a place where people could find not only opportunity, but also understanding, support, and the chance to change their lives. "More coffee?" Claire offered, smiling. "Always," Sterling replied, and in that single word lay a promise. To keep growing, learning, transforming, one heart at a time, one life at a time, one dream at a time.